Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Pepis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is William Deresiewicz, essayist, cultural critic, and the author of Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite, and the Way to a Meaningful Life. He taught at Yale University for 10 years and served as the Mary Rout Chair of Writing at Scripps College during 2015 spring term. Deresiewicz gave 2 lectures at the Oregon Humanities Center's as the Oregon Humanities Center's 2014-15 Criticos Professor. The first, What is College For? A Defense of the Liberal Arts, took place in Eugene on May 13, 2015. The second, Education in a Neoliberal Age, took place in Portland on May 14, 2015. Thanks, Bill, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me here.
What led you to the arguments that you make in Excellent Sheep? How did you get there?
I got there by being a professor at Yale and a longtime student and graduate instructor at Columbia. I was an observer of that world for many years. And the arguments, they were kind of assembled one little bit at a time over my years as a professor. I left academia in 2008. I wrote an essay that I didn't think anybody would notice called The Disadvantages of an Elite Education. Could have given it a better title if I thought anyone was actually going to see it. And apparently, I really struck a nerve. I mean, that was the moment. Those few days after that thing came out and went viral, and I started to hear from students saying, "Thanks for putting this into words. Thanks for talking about what's missing from my education and I'm getting too much of in my education, which is stress and pressure." And I took it from there. I mean, I know probably this sounds like a humble brag or things that people say about their books, but the book really came to me, and it came to me from its audience. So
tell the story of the title.
Excellent Sheep, right? Yeah. It came from came out of the mouth of one of my students at Yale. We were talking. It was a class on friendship, and we were talking about solitude and sort of various things. And I'm not even sure how she made the leap, but she said, "Are you saying that we're all just excellent sheep?" This was her sort of dawning moment of self-recognition, and it's a great phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just a great phrase because it's a great phrase, but it really encapsulates very well, because I think students today, and I realize the more I go on that this is not just about Ivy League, Stanford. I mean, this goes very far into American higher education in general. So students in many ways are better than students have ever been before at being students, at figuring out what the teacher wants and giving it to him or her. And they're really bad at figuring out what they want. And that's the problem, and that's the sheep half of it.
So elaborate that. What are the disadvantages of elite education in the United States?
Or of increasingly even the kind of education you might get at the University of Oregon. Students are taught that education, A, is for purely practical ends. It is about getting that first job out of college. And everything else that we meaning humanity, has always understood to be a part of education and its goals, like learning how to think about the world, learning how to think about your life, learning how to question the values that you've been handed so you can figure out what your own values are, learning how to be a person and an adult and not just a worker. All of that is gone, or largely gone. And then the other problem is that even the way you get to that practical goal consists of a series of hurdles you jump over, hoops you jump through, boxes you check, blanks that you fill in. And there's very little, I think, initiative and very little sense of why you're doing it. And I think my semester teaching at Scripps, a private fancy liberal arts college, has really unfortunately reinforced all of this. I hadn't been in the classroom in 7 years, and so now I have a data point that's farther down the line. And my students were smart, they were certainly nice, they certainly cared about things, but in terms of thinking for themselves, they really had not had a lot of help.
How did we get there? How did it happen?
This is especially what I talk about in Portland, education in a neoliberal age. Neoliberalism, broadly speaking, Reaganism, means that your value is your value in the marketplace as a consumer, but even more as a producer, somebody with a job. And education has followed in its train, not just at elite colleges, not just at colleges, but K through 12, and not just in the United States. This is what education is increasingly looking like. And when you hear a politician saying, we need more STEM and don't study art history, as our president said, when you hear about metrics and testing and teaching to the test, And most of what goes under the name of reform, the school reform movement, that's what people are talking about. Listen, the greatest example was Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin, who tried to strip out the language in the University of Wisconsin that talked about the pursuit of knowledge and the creation of a citizenry, and just replace it with creating workers for the state workforce. That's neoliberal education.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
So, the book's critique is aimed squarely at the elite of American higher ed. You've already said that you're realizing that it's a much broader problem.
Yeah.
Are all American colleges and universities creating this excellent sheep? Are they all manufacturing conformists?
Well, I haven't been to all of them. And there is one of the strengths of our system is that there are a lot of different kinds of institutional types, and even within those types there are variations. The bad news is that there's an increasing homogenization, I think. Some places like the University of Chicago that have always been famous for their intellectualism seem to be moving back towards the middle. One of my favorite places happens to be in Portland. It's Reed College that is really holding the line at real practical cost. Just like, and I never pretend that this is otherwise, that if a student is going to study what they really care about and pursue a career that's really meaningful to them, they're probably going to have to give something up in the form of wealth and status. And a college, likewise, is going to have to give something up, and Reed, to its great credit, has been willing to make that bargain. And I think, unfortunately, it seems to be harder and harder for colleges to do that, if for no other reason than because they are under a lot of financial pressure. Yeah.
What do we do about that?
Raise taxes.
Raise taxes?
Raise taxes. Listen, I mean, there are other things that we can do. There are problems with higher education spending priorities, although many of the things that we blame colleges for, they are really responding to the pressures of an academic marketplace that forces them to treat 18-year-olds as customers. So they're giving 18-year-olds what 18-year-olds think they want, like gyms instead of teachers. But mainly, University of Oregon gets 5% of its funding from the state. What do you expect? So after World War II, during the heyday of the liberal, what used to be called the liberal consensus, one of the many great things we did collectively was to build these remarkable systems of public higher education, most famously in California, but in many other places as well. And then we systematically started to defund them during the age of neoliberalism. Ronald Reagan, again, perfect encapsulation, the state should not subsidize intellectual curiosity. Listen, all the talk in the world is not going to change this. We need to put our money where our mouth is. I think this is not just higher education. This is K through 12. This is our roads and bridges. This is clean energy. We need to make the investments that we should be making as a decent society, but really, even if we just want to think in practical terms, if we want to think more than 3 months at a time, we need to invest in our people and in our physical infrastructure.
But what does it matter that we're creating this class of excellent sheep? Who cares? There are not that many of them. What does it matter? What's the problem with
well,
that?
Again, I mean, if we stipulate that this is not just about elite college students, but all college students and really all students, that it affects everybody. If you think of people simply as workers for a workforce who only need to learn the minimum number of skills they need to learn to occupy the place in the system that somehow has been predetermined for them, because of course our distribution of resources is ridiculously unequal, then it doesn't matter. If you believe that part of the American idea is, for instance, social mobility, all of a sudden we've woken up to the fact that we have very little social mobility left. Why is that? Well, educational inequality is a huge reason for it.
And that problem's gotten worse, yes? Educational inequality.
Yes, educational inequality in particular has gotten worse, yeah. So if that matters to you, then education is, spending on education is going to matter. If social mobility matters to you. And I find this to be such a strange paradox. More and more, actually, businesses and in their wake, universities talk about innovation and creativity, and yet we think we're going to get there by having kids fill out answer sheets from the time they're in kindergarten. So if you really care about innovation and creativity, you might want to educate towards that. I should say that in many ways, our system somehow is in many ways the best system in the world. because we teach in K through 12 in a way that's designed to incite kids' curiosity, get them to ask questions. It's not just this rote education. And then when they get to college, they're not forced to study just one thing, as is the case in every other country. And other countries are trying to emulate us, specifically countries in East Asia that are looking to emulate our innovative dynamism. And yet, we are doing everything we can to dismantle that as fast as we can, because we think we should be more like China, Singapore, and Korea.
The book and the related essays have provoked powerful reactions, predictably critical ones from within the Ivy Leagues, but also other elite institutions. Tell us about some of those criticisms and, most important, your responses to them. So what is the nature of the criticisms that have been leveled at the book?
Well, to be honest, first of all, there's so many it would take the full half hour to talk about them. And
choose a couple.
And I think a lot of them, and obviously you need to take this as my opinion, I think a lot of them are really defensive, really personal attacks, questioning my motives rather than debating the substance of what I'm talking about. I would say they fall into two categories that are worth talking about. One is, oh, no, we don't have these problems here. Everything is great here. That tends to come from, not just from people who are heavily invested in the institution, but from senior management. Mm-hmm. And you can just, ask somebody who waits tables. Senior management never knows what's going on. The other reaction that I think has been especially disheartening, that there's been a significant amount of, even from within the Ivy League, is saying basically this guy's talking about we need to give students a real education, we need to help them develop a self. And the answer there is, what is this? What is this thing he's talking about? I mean, what kind of sucker is this guy? Everybody knows that the purpose of going to school is to do as well as you can financially on the back end. So I don't know if it's cynicism or resignation, or this has been going on for so long that people have forgotten that this is part of the purpose of an education. But that to me is the worst part of it. And this is why I say over and over again, the most highly ranked institution isn't necessarily going to give you the best education.
What about the students? How have they responded to the book?
Well, listen, again, there's certainly been responses across the board, and there are plenty of students. Student journalists in particular tend to really dislike my argument. I think, I'm not going to speculate, I think they tend to be very invested in their institution. And having gone to journalism school, well, enough said. Having gone to journalism school myself, they may not be the most committed to liberal values. This whole book is built on the fact that many students respond and say, thank you for talking about this. That has not stopped. And I've been to a lot of schools. I've lost count at this point. A lot of schools. And the room is always full. People always want to talk about it. And it always ends up kind of turning into like a 2-hour advising session. Because, listen, professors are busy. Professors are not incentivized to be mentors anymore. Students have all kinds of questions and doubts and self-doubts and anxieties that they don't get very much chance to discuss. And I would say even more rarely in a group, now that I think about it. I haven't had this thought before, but it's great to have a mentor that you can talk about these things, but it's even better if you see that you're not the only one.
The second part of the book's title, The Way to a Meaningful Life, is crucial, and you were hovering around it. What's that way? Tell us what you argue.
Right,
the way
it sounds awfully pretentious.
Forget that, but tell us the substance of it.
Well, look, I want to walk it back a little bit. I am not prescribing the way to a meaningful life. I talk about especially how college can help you. So this is, to me, this is the heart of it and the heart of what I say. It's not about doing any one particular thing. I don't praise or criticize any particular vocational choice, including, banking. I mean, there can be good reasons for doing that and bad reasons for wanting to become a musician, for instance. But I think the way to a meaningful life is to choose and construct your path for yourself based on decisions that you've made with a good and growing amount of self-knowledge. And the problem is that students come to college and often leave college only having known what their parents want of them and what their society wants of them. and really having trouble figuring out. I can't tell you how many students have literally said to me, I don't know what I want. So what's the point of time? I'm trying to find the thing I care about. Well, it doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't only happen in college or only in the college classroom, but college should help you start to do that. And to me, that's what the humanities part of a college education is really about. It's not about mastering a certain body of knowledge, although that might be a nice thing to do. It's about encountering the kinds of texts that can help you start to ask these questions in a way that studying physics can't. And I have nothing against studying physics. In fact, we need more people to study physics. But it's not going to do it because physics is not an investigation into what it means to be human. And the humanities, philosophy and literature, religious studies, history, are, or should be.
So that kind of full-throated defense of the liberal arts and humanities comes as music to the ears of people like me who study and teach literature and who promote and defend the humanities. So what do you say to those, like the President of the United States, you alluded to this, that it is wiser for a youth to get a practical education, to get a professional degree, than to major in art history or literature? How do you respond to that? So I agree with you,
right,
100%.
Right.
So how do we convince Barack Obama that majoring in art history is a good thing to do? Then it will help you to succeed in life.
I have so many arguments, I'm not even sure where to start. To him in particular, I would say, how did you become the person you became? That's why it's so distressing to hear it from him, somebody who was clearly steeped in the humanities. Yeah. First of all, the two are not mutually exclusive. That's the whole idea of our system, where you have a major and you have electives. Second of all, the most practical thing in the world is figuring out not only what you care about, which you're going to be better at, but also what you're good at, right? We can't all be engineers. Not only can't we all be engineers because there aren't enough jobs for us all to be engineers, and some of us would never be good engineers, but society actually needs people with a whole range of different kinds of skills. And we can't predict what the big jobs, what the well-paying jobs are going to be. His own former head of Council of Economic Advisors, Austin Goolsbee, has said, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 30% of the high-paying jobs are in sectors that did not exist 20 years ago. And especially now when people talk about the importance of creativity, and we see new, actually, avenues for creativity, video production, design. These are all growing fields. Another argument is that while there is a significant wage gap between technical and non-technical majors at graduation, that gap almost completely disappears within 10 years, because the kinds of things that the humanities teach you actually can be very helpful for your career, but it takes a little longer for that to become, because the humanities and a liberal education, which really means a broad spectrum education, help you to continue to re-educate yourself. Even the engineers will tell you everything we're teaching our students will be obsolete in 10 years. They need to keep learning, so they need to learn how to learn, and that's what college is for.
Do you think that your arguments have had any influence on university administrators to make changes or to talk about it? Do you think a million hits on the article, I don't know how many copies of the book has sold. Surely some of the people that are reading these must be academic administrators. Surely there must be some. Have you seen any evidence of that?
Well, here's what I would say. Aside from the fact that there's so many different factors weighing on anyone's decision that it's kind of hard to say whether my book has made a difference. But I would say this. First of all, I know that it's made a difference to students because I hear from them. Also, most of the time when I get invited somewhere, like here, I guess, it's usually on the part of people who are sympathetic to my argument and need their hand strengthened and need another voice to come in from the outside and help them make the case. So, and I would even say with students, I don't really think I've taken someone from one end of the spectrum to the other end. But there are lots of people in the middle who are looking for some affirmation, whether it's about the choices they've made or the questions that they're asking. And I think that I've helped make a difference for those people.
So let me ask you a sort of different kind of question. So this is a research university. You and others have argued that there's currently in the American Academy at the university level an overemphasis on research. And you've advocated that liberal arts colleges are the place where students should go, undergraduates should go, and personally I'm very sympathetic to that argument. But I'm a prof you were a prof. How should scholars, in your judgment, balance the demands of research and teaching?
Right.
I'm also a teacher. I love to teach. I came to the profession to be a teacher, but I'm a researcher. I'm here. I like to research. What's the way to strike that balance so that we don't undermine the job of liberal education and the power of the humanities?
Okay, so two important things to say at the outset. This is not a new problem. This is like at least 100 years old. This is inherent to the structure of the American Academy, that you have the research university and like the English college, and they're trying to live within the same institution. The second thing is that the answer is not what professors should do, because professors respond reasonably to the incentives that they're given, and the incentives that they're given are all for research. Don't spend one more second than you have to in your teaching. So it's a question of university leaders, of administrators, to change the structure of incentives and set up very specific systems that will help incentivize professors to devote more of their time to teaching and less of their time to research. With all due respect to all the hardworking academic researchers out there, I think we all know that a great deal of the research that's produced really doesn't make a hell of a lot of difference. Of course, it's never my research that doesn't make a difference, but I mean, we know this. We know that most of the highly cited articles are still produced by the same powerhouse institutions that were the dominant research institutions 50 and even 100 years ago. People produce research because they feel they have to. So that's it. It's about changing incentives.
Has any group of academic presidents, deans ever asked you to come speak?
Actually, they have.
Huh.
The organization of elite liberal arts colleges is called the Annapolis Group. It's about 120 schools. And I addressed one of their annual gatherings. There were about 30, 35 college presidents. But of course, as you said, I say nice things about liberal arts colleges, so it's not surprising. My encounters with other administrators have been few and usually not happy. But listen, there's a Reed College, Board of Trustees. Colorado College, I'm going to talk to their Board of Trustees. Again, liberal arts colleges.
One of the criticisms that's made about you is that you bite the hand that feeds you, because you've given all these lectures at all these elite institutions. But I discovered that the invitations to these institutions, who does the invitations often come from?
Well, it's always the people I was talking about. It's some professor or the head of some small center or a student group. A lot of them are from student groups.
Yeah.
A lot of them are from student groups.
That's
the first one I ever did, which was at Harvard, it was a few months after the article came out. Right.
So one of the chapters in here derives from a lecture that you gave at the United States Military Academy called Solitude and Leadership.
Right.
You haven't spoken about the leadership part of your argument. Tell us a little bit about that part.
I think you might have been touching on it earlier when you said, "Who cares that?"
Yeah, that was what I thought you were going to launch into.
I realized that, because even if we are just talking about the people produced by the most prestigious schools, and I certainly think that many of these problems are the worst among them, it matters to all of us because they're making the decisions. I mean, we have evolved a system in which the meritocracy has become more and more self-replicating. Mainly because it's so expensive to produce a kid who can get in to a fancy school. And elite employers and graduate programs increasingly draw, I mean, it's not an accident that most of our recent presidential candidates, almost all of them really, have Ivy League pedigree. I mean, John McCain is the exception. Of course, he was from a different time. So we're being ruled by these excellent sheep. And I think that if you look at our adult leadership class, especially in the last 10, 15 years of massive failure all across all the sectors, banking, the corporate world, the media, the military, government, academia itself, they not only tend disproportionately to come from these institutions, but they have all of the characteristics that I identify among students at those institutions. They're risk averse, they're unimaginative, they're very self-interested, but also very convinced of their own virtue, because after all, it's a meritocracy, so they must have earned all of their privileges. And they're incredibly out of touch with the people on whose behalf they're supposed to be acting. This is also why, look, I mean, the earlier phase, from like Truman to Reagan actually, almost all of those presidents had gone to public universities, in some cases very obscure schools, Truman didn't go to college at all. This was also the heyday of the public university, when this kind of opportunity and this kind of education was more widely distributed. So again, to me, this is why we need to reclaim democracy. And one of the problems with, my chapter on leadership is a full-throated attack on the concept of leadership as it's come to be used. Because I think it really just means being in charge. It doesn't actually mean anything like taking responsibility, for example. One of the things that I hate the most about it is that it seems to have displaced the word citizenship, which is about collective self-governance. Now our model is that a leader is going to lead us into some brighter future, and we're going to sit back and let them, if only because we've been deprived of agency, right? I mean, nobody feels like they really have any control anymore. Partly, largely, because the system is so rigged, because if you haven't been born into the leadership class, you're unlikely to get there.
We have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
So this is probably my last question. So what's the next step for Bill Deresiewicz? What are you
For
doing?
me?
Yeah. What's your next thing? What are you doing now?
I'm just
Riding this wave?
I'm just a little freelance writer who lives in Portland and sits in a room, and I'm beginning to move towards the next book project. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be about higher education, although I certainly think there's a lot more to say. I want to continue to write about it. I've been interested in another word that's become a buzzword, which is creativity. Mm-hmm. And I've given some talks actually in Portland to the creative community about how the nature of being an artist is changing, mm-hmm. because you have to you have to be an entrepreneur of the self like everybody else. But what makes it especially interesting is not just that it affects creative professionals, but what we said before, which is that businesses have decided that creativity is the thing that they must bottle and, consume or whatever. So it's become a word that somehow plays a kind of strange role in our economy, and therefore in our education. Everyone's trying to figure out how to educate for creativity, as if you could sit people down in a classroom and teach them to be creative. So I kind of want to write like a meta book about creativity, like why are all these other books about creativity? Why are we talking about it so much? And we'll see where it leads.
Well, we look forward to the appearance of that book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure.
I've been speaking with William Deresiewicz, author of Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life. He gave 2 lectures at the University of Oregon. Let's try again. He gave 2 lectures as the Oregon Humanities Center's 2014-15 Criticos Professor. The first, What is College For? A Defense of the Liberal Arts, took place in Eugene on May 13th, 2015. The second, Education in a Neoliberal Age, took place in Portland on May 14th, 2015. Thanks for watching.